Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Becoming Anchored podcast. My name is Laura Deneen, and I am super excited for this episode that we have planned for today. I cannot wait to dive into this content with you all. We have an amazing guest today. Amber, how do you say your last name? Lucchino?
Lucchino.
Lucchino. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Lucchino with us. I should have totally asked you that before.
Everyone says Lucchino, so totally fine.
Well, we're going to talk about imperfections today. And so what a wonderful way to start off our podcast. But yeah, we have Amber Lucchino today on the show, and she is just so lovely, a wonderful colleague and friend. And I'm super excited for you all to learn from her today. If you are new to the Becoming Anchored podcast, we are really about two things on this show. So first and foremost, Lauren and I, who is not with us today, but is with us in spirit, we really talk about our shared humanity with you all. So what I mean by that is really just this idea that we go through pain and suffering, and we also have moments of joy and peace. And we are really just here to ride the waves of life with you all, first and foremost, as humans. And then secondly, we have the wonderful privilege and gift of sitting with clients. We cherish the work that we do. We absolutely adore. I don't even want to call it like a job, but this work, I guess, is a more fitting description. And we really just love the clients that we get to sit with day in and day out. And so we have the amazing privilege of sharing some of the wisdom that we have gleaned over the years as therapists. So welcome. And real quick disclaimer, if you are seeking therapy in the state of Tennessee, we would be honored to see you. And at the end of the show, Amber will share a little bit more about how you can find her and some of the work that she does. But please reach out. We see clients across the state of Tennessee virtually and then in person as well. And if not, we encourage you to find someone local to you. So without further ado, today Amber and I were chatting about just different topics. And I know Amber could share on many different topics, but Amber is such a wonderful resource just for how therapists show up. She trains her team to excel in the treatment of their clients. And so we thought it might be helpful just to talk about what your therapist wants you to know about themselves. And so this is really in the therapy world, person of the therapist is what we refer to it as. But some of the things that make our job so unique, we really wanted to cover in today's episode. So Amber, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm just curious, what comes up for you with this title and really the content of this episode? Where would you like to start us off today?
Well, I've been doing this a long time, so about 20 years. So I've certainly seen a huge shift in the therapy world and what modalities we're focusing on and shifting more into evidence-based and all of those pieces, which is awesome, like more research-based. But I think the thing that's been consistent over 20 years is really the professional use of ourself in session. And that, like, if we're not willing to do the deep work in our own stories, and if we're not willing to lean into the discomfort ourselves, it can be really difficult to make traction with a client when we're asking them to do those things.
Yeah, so let's unpack this a little bit. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by doing our own work.
Yeah, that is really loaded, isn't it? As I said.
Well, I just would love to hear your language and your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think what comes up for me is like, we're human also, right? So none of us are immune to hard things, to traumatic things happening in our life, our own histories, which largely propels most of us to do this work anyway. If you ask any therapist their why, you typically will get a backstory of, here's something I experienced in my own story or in a loved one's story. And that often precipitates. I think when we're asking clients to come in and talk about their feelings and unpack hard things they've been through, are we also willing to go to therapy, have our support, like dive into the deeper therapeutic work that we're doing with our clients?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, gosh, there's so much here that I just would love to pick your brain on. And I agree with you. I mean, and I don't think for the record that this means that we have to have gone through everything that our clients go through. But there is a piece around our willingness to look at our own pain and our own shame, hurt, disappointment, grief,
Yeah.
that does expand what we call our window of tolerance. And we at Anchored are a trauma-informed practice. And I know that you do a lot of deep trauma work as well in your line of work. And so I do think that gives us the ability, once we do our own work and once we widen our own windows of tolerance, to sit well with clients.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with you, right? Like if we don't have a deep emotional capacity to tolerate our own emotions and our own pain, how in the world are we going to tolerate someone else's pain? And so through that lens of the window of tolerance, which for the record, we talk a lot about that on the show. If this is the first episode you're listening to, go look it up. Dan Siegel coined this term, I think in the 1990s. And so, yeah, this is a wonderful framework, right? It's like, okay, if we're asking clients to go there in air quotations, then we have to be willing to do that as well.
And I think recognizing too that complex trauma is mostly what I've worked with over my career in different capacities, and they become highly attuned to scanning for safety and danger in their environment and picking up on subtle body language of a clinician, of facial expressions, affect, because that's what's helped to keep them safe over their life. And so I love that you brought up window of tolerance, because they will become very aware of if we get out of ours during a session, and clients will hold back if they're sensing like, oh, this is too much for my clinician, or I can tell it's got them a little uncomfortable. So I think really tuning into what's going on within us is something I talk a lot with supervisees about. It's less, I think, sometimes about what we're saying and more, what is my internal response, right? Like, what am I noticing in my body? Am I experiencing any countertransference where something the client has said has brought up something in me and that might influence my response? So much of that in the moment reflection, I think, is critical to really show up in an authentic and helpful way.
Absolutely. And it's quick too. And also it can be subtle. And so as a clinician, right, you're holding so many different things. You're trying to process what the client has shared with you.
Yeah.
You're also monitoring your own body language. And then also hopefully challenging, encouraging, giving them feedback. And all of that is happening fast. And so I do think that is a skill that we can always be growing in, right? It's not like we've arrived. I think
100%.
that's a point to make. But yeah, that internal awareness. And I think another term that we could coin today is really this concept of embodiment, right? So I use my hands a lot. I'm actually doing it on this podcast if you're watching on YouTube. I tend to poke fun at myself. I spill my coffee or water in session. We train our staff to really like lean in. Yeah. If someone's sharing something hard, I'm not going to like fold my arms and like look at them like this, right?
100%.
Because I wouldn't want that as a client. And so it's just noticing even the small things that we're doing or not doing really that either I think increase or decrease that sense of safety. So that felt sense of safety that sometimes we can't even like necessarily put our finger on, but the client notices from us as clinicians.
Absolutely.
So yeah, those things are all just really important. And even before I became a therapist, those are things that my first therapist in Nashville did so well. And looking back, I'm like, oh, she did that when I maybe was unhealthy and I didn't necessarily know that's what she was doing. But that's one of the things that helped me recover. And I was the recipient of really excellent therapy because she was so embodied and modeled what that was like even for me as a client.
Yeah.
So just interesting even to reflect on different ways that clinicians do that and different therapists that I've seen over the years that have done that so well.
100%. I think that communicating safety is just so core, whether or not someone has trauma. And that can be really subtle things of offering water when they first come to session. If I've noticed a client is way out of their window of tolerance, sometimes I've sat on the floor just to communicate to their nervous system. There's not a power differential and that they're in a safe space. So I think there's really basic things that we can do while we're monitoring ourselves to create that safety in a session.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've done that as well. Sat on the floor for different sessions just to like really increase that sense of groundedness.
Yeah.
And even permission, I think, to like break the rules, so to speak. And of
100%.
course, we want to break the rules in like appropriate ways. But, you know, I think just even the permission to ask the client, hey, do you want to change where you're, seated in the room? Do you want to move spots on the couch? Do you want to stand up? Do you want to sit down? Do you want to sit on the floor with me?
Yeah.
And a lot of that, I think, is from that skill of immediacy, right? So that's the skill of noticing a client's, like you're talking about, right? A client's body language, Are they outside of their window of tolerance? We as clinicians hopefully are always noticing those things and gently pointing that out to a client, because the goal is that they are taking that observation and then practicing that themselves outside of session, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we can be strategic as clinicians if we're noticing some sort of activation internally. I've done in session before where I've been like, gosh, I'm just really noticing X, Y, and Z in my body. I'm going to grab some oils and take a deep breath. Do you want to do that with me?
Absolutely.
And so I'm really regulating myself and modeling that it's okay to say that and use a tool in the moment and inviting them to do that with me. So it's that co-regulation, really, like paying attention to my own body sensations and then inviting that with a client to join in.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely asked a client like, hey, I actually realized I'm really thirsty. Can I go grab some water? When I was pregnant with my daughter, and for the record, even if you're not pregnant as a therapist listening to this and you need to go use the restroom, that would be totally fine. I was like, I need to go use the restroom right now. And so, yeah, I mean, just even those small things of like, hey, your needs matter and my needs matter.
Yep.
And let's cultivate an awareness of those needs and an ability to meet the needs in our sessions, because a lot of clients come to us and they don't believe that their needs matter,
100%.
or they've been told that their needs don't matter by various traumatic experiences that they've had growing up or even in their adulthood. And so I do love this like modeling that you're talking about. Yeah.
I think the more we can share that, I love that you talk about so much on your podcast and in your practice of this shared humanity. But yes, we do know some things, right? Like we know some things about trauma and about eating disorders and some skills and tools, but really coming from a framework of the client is the expert on themselves and I'm coming alongside. So getting away from that power differential of I'm the expert and can impart to you things that will change your life, and more I'm coming from a place of curiosity and coming alongside, which I think is really an important shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And really to speak to that, I had a supervisor once who shared with me just about the importance of gently challenging ourselves to notice as clinicians if we are walking ahead of our client, right? So we're going too much, too fast, too soon, and maybe they're struggling to keep up or their nervous system is overwhelmed, or if we're walking behind them and like pushing them along. So just noticing, I think that can really keep us in check as therapists of like, am I really walking alongside this person? And what does that actually tangibly mean in my sessions?
100%. Yeah. And I think that goes as basic as the treatment plan. Like, is it really us saying, here's what the goals are? Or is it really hearing from the client, here are the goals, even if that maybe differs from what we might think it is or the direction we want to go, but really letting them have a say in that and giving consent to what we're actually working on in session.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's that collaborative piece that I think is so important, along with like returning to the treatment goals, right? So it's like, hey, I objectively notice progress in you? Like, let's celebrate that. And do you sense that you are making progress towards your stated goals?
Yeah.
And if not, let's explore that with curiosity over shame and a non-judgment approach. And I think sometimes clients minimize their goals or have difficulty even noting their progress. And so that can be a beautiful way to celebrate progress or to shift directions in therapy. No human is the same. And so someone might respond a little bit better to acceptance and commitment therapy, and someone else might respond better to CBT or
100%.
ERP or EMDR. And so I think just even having flexibility as clinicians to honor the story that's like right in front of us versus like imposing what we think the client.
That's really been fun to see for me at our residential location. Every week during our treatment team, we bring in each client and they're checking in of, here's where my goals are. This is what I think I need more support in. We're asking, is there anything we need to adjust? So it's really moving to a place of, like you said, collaboration and allowing them to weigh in on what they need. And that might look different than what we think their goals might need to be, but really meeting them where they're at is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it has been interesting for me, I think, circling back to this idea of doing our own work, right? Because I adore seeing clients. I don't supervise the team anymore. Lauren does. So she's the clinical director at our practice. And so she has more kind of one-on-one interaction with them, but I'm super grateful for each of them. And one of the things that I have noticed too over the years is, for lack of a better way of saying it, but in my opinion, the best therapists are the ones that have gone to therapy. And so when we are interviewing someone, we're not directly asking about their therapeutic experience. But like you said, oftentimes they are like, you know what, I went to therapy for this and this, and it changed my life. And now I want to do this as my job.
Yeah.
And so it is cool to hear people, even that we're interviewing for positions here at Anchored, share about their own experiences in therapy. And in my opinion, that is one of the things that makes them really excellent and gives them the skills that they need to not only see clients, but have clients come back, right? Because like you were talking about, I mean, that's retention. And we talk a lot about that in our practice of like, hey, there's no shame. And what can we learn from this experience, right? So did your client feel safe to open up? What are you doing as a therapist to cultivate that and to have clients return so that they don't give up on the therapeutic process? And I understand that it's not all on the clinician. I know that there's like various factors, but it is one piece, right? So what is the clinician's efforts, if you will, to make the client feel heard or help the client feel heard, seen, and understood?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And tagging on what you were saying about the humanity, I think if a client shows up and we're acting like we have it all together, I know that doesn't make me feel comfortable. Like if I'm in a professional setting and everyone seems real put together, I'm just like, oh, I definitely don't. So this is awkward. And then I'm uncomfortable. But I think for any of us as humans, when we can show up with authenticity and vulnerability and have that met with compassion and kind of shared vulnerability as appropriate, like that is so critical, I think, in developing that rapport. I mean, we could have a whole other talk probably on appropriate use of self-disclosure and what the ethical parameters are. We won't dive into that today, but I do think that's a piece of it, is even skillfully, if you do have parts of your story that would be relevant, that would help the client's process, knowing when to strategically fold that in. But ultimately showing up in your own humanity, I think invites the same in our clients.
It does. And I think our clients typically already struggle with this idea of like perception or image management. And so we are really doing them a disservice if we're not modeling what it looks like to take that mask off. I can't remember what age, like the expert researchers talk about, like we learn to mask, right? We learn, and what I mean by that, if you're listening today, is like we learn to put up this mask and this kind of facade, and we start to overly value what people think of us at a really tender young age. I think it's like 4 or 5.
I feel like it's getting younger and younger, unfortunately.
I know, totally. Yeah, it's absolutely getting younger. And that's also a little bit scary, right? I have an almost 2-year-old and I'm like, oh gosh, like I want her to have permission to like squeal and laugh and cry and without this mask. And so I do love that you brought this up. And one of my values is actually authenticity. And we actually did an episode on that earlier on in the show, because I do think it's so crucial to start to notice, okay, what environments am I masking in and what might be causing that or triggering that or activating that, so to speak. And with clients especially, we want to unmask and we want to show our imperfections, of course, within appropriate context and boundaries and ethics, right? But I do think it's absolutely appropriate to show our imperfections, to model imperfection, and to share about how we move through that in healthy ways, right? So I was actually just telling a client about, she was expressing some conflict with her partner. And I was telling her about like just normalizing that, right? Yep. So like, hey, the last time that Sean and I had a fight, this is what transpired. And this is one of the things that I did to move through that healthfully. And of course, I'm not like sharing inappropriate details, but I am modeling like, hey, there are times when we're going to have conflict with your spouse. And instead of using maladaptive behaviors, let's figure out how we can support you in moving through this in a different way. And also letting her know, like, hey, there are times when I have conflict with Sean and I'm a therapist and still don't handle it perfectly, right?
And I think we need that, because I think they can look at us as therapists or providers again and think, well, they have it all together and they have it all figured out. One thing I'm noticing is the older I get, I guess this is one of the blessings, the more comfortable I'm getting with what I don't know and what I'm not good at. Whereas as a new clinician, I think it's pretty common to have this sense of imposter syndrome and I need to prove myself or show up in a certain way. So I think that has been one of the gifts of being in the field a long time, is just being so much more comfortable with showing up in a very human way. And I think that gives an invitation to our clients of like, okay, this is another human, like I can unmask as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like an internal, I think, confidence or peace.
Yeah.
Those are the two words that are coming to mind. And I think some clinicians, especially in their earlier years as a therapist, can almost put too much pressure on themselves. And that can lead to the client perceiving that they're masking, even if the clinician is not thinking that they're doing that. And yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying about this, right? Just this idea that we can be confident in our skill set. And of course, we want to support our clients towards their healing and growth, but there's less like of a performance, I guess that might be a word, that not that we're like getting into this field to perform, but almost that pressure that can lead to that performative kind of, I don't know, stuff or issues that can happen in the therapy space between therapist and clients.
Definitely.
Yeah. And one of the things that I love too, just about like person of the therapist, is permission to make mistakes, right? So when we're circling back to this title of like, okay, what your therapist wants you to know about themselves, right? We are going to mess up in the therapeutic space, and we are going to say things that maybe don't sit well with our clients, or maybe the client rejects your feedback, or it doesn't feel pertinent to them or helpful, or maybe they receive it as criticism. And I think one of the marks of a really solid clinician is the ability to repair.
Yes.
So not
I'm so
only
glad
to
you brought that up.
notice, yeah, it's not only to notice the rupture, right? So if I have a client that kind of shifts in their seat and, I don't know, stops making eye contact with me or whatever they do when there is a rupture, I will pause and ask them like, hey, how did you receive that?
Yeah.
Was there something that just happened? Let's slow this down right now and apologize if necessary, share my intention. And of course, there's impact as well, but I want to hear about like how the client received that, what their emotional response was, what they would like to share with me, how I can do better moving forward and grow from that experience. So I think that also is really key in the therapeutic relationship, is to model what healthy repair looks like.
Yeah, I definitely think that's where the magic is. Like my newer therapist or supervisees can talk about the discomfort that can happen if you're in a session and you notice like, ooh, that just did not land at all, or that was not what I intended. And I'm like, oh, this is exciting though, because that's where the magic is. Like that's the in the moment when there can be appropriate, healthy repair and like a return to that relationship in a safe way. That's not just helpful in the moment, but that's also healing like historical things in their body and nervous system. So I actually get excited when that happens, if there's ruptures, because it's like, this really is the magic and the opportunity for us to show up and have a different outcome than maybe they've had with other people in their life.
Sure. And putting all the puzzle pieces together here, right? Like if we allow shame and guilt to direct that conversation, it might not go so well, right? So if you're a newer therapist listening to the show and maybe you struggle with your own perfectionism, or maybe have gone to a place of shame or guilt, I have so much compassion for you as someone who has personally gone there. But I think it's the ability to hold both. So if you're watching this, right, it's like, okay, I'm noticing that guilt or shame are here, and I'm going to challenge myself to notice them, but also do this repair work with the client. And that's that dialect, right, that I think as clinicians we can even struggle with, right? It doesn't have to be one or the other. Maybe it is an opportunity for you to learn as a therapist and improve and change maybe your language or how your body posture or how you say something. And we have to be cautious not to let guilt or shame drive that conversation. And that can be tricky. And that's part of doing our own work, is that ability to hold both, right? Can I see this person right here in front of me? And can I maybe notice some of my own emotional responses that once this client gets up and leaves, that I can get my own supervision around or support around? And that's hard to do.
And I think encouraging clients in our sessions to just saying that there's going to be times where I might say something that doesn't land right, and I want you to give me feedback on that. Like I really welcome that feedback. It's important for this process. It's important for our relationship. So really opening the floor for clients to do that, and for us, again, to be able to receive it, to your point, to be able to hold that if a client is brave enough to bring that to the floor.
Okay. Yeah, because our job is not to get defensive or to stonewall a client, God forbid, or to criticize them, right? Like we want to do it differently than maybe how other people in their life have responded to feedback. And that's hard. And that requires a lot of our own emotional work and tolerance, if you will, And that's just a lot of, I think, inner work that has to take place as a therapist. I remember just as we're talking, my first therapist that I saw in Nashville, and I've had the privilege of seeing a couple different just amazing clinicians, but I remember looking at her a couple years in and I was like, I want to do what you do. And that's such a sweet like memory just because she was so impactful in my life. And I had seen a handful of other people prior, and I think it was a blend of like maybe me not being ready or maybe me not having the same quality of therapy that I'd gotten with her. But
Yeah.
it's so cool to see even the ripple effect, right? Like I've had clients that have gone on to be therapists and just some of the impact that maybe we don't even know about, right? I think as clinicians, and that story just reminds me of that.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think what else. I think showing up imperfectly, unmasking, permission to repair.
I think the other thing that's coming to mind to circle around is paying really close attention. I think this is where supervision comes in when we might need to step away from the work, whether that's due to personal things in our own life or burnout that can happen if we're not taking care of ourselves. And for therapists to know it's okay to step away. Like whether that looks like a vacation, like you need to take some time off, or looks like something different, that's certainly something that I've had to do at various points in my career, or even just shift the type of work I'm doing to make sure that I'm really taking care of myself and practicing in an ethical way.
Absolutely. I love that you brought this up. Yeah, vacations, sabbaticals. Yeah. I know several people that have taken sabbaticals and they've come back rejuvenated and nourished really their emotional, mental, physical selves. Yeah. So I think that's really healthy. One thing that I have had to do as well is really decrease the number of clients that I am seeing in any given week. I am pretty driven. And so if a client wants to see me, I think I tend to be like, oh, yes, right? And so just noticing my own boundary system so that I can also show up well in my personal life, right? For my husband and daughter and friends and family. And permission to really uncouple my worth from like the number of clients that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And I think it's also given me the ability to show up more fully for the clients that are in my caseload. And even noticing like as I've taken on more responsibilities, like from a business perspective, how that's impacting my capacity as well. And those are all things that we have to be really intentional about noticing because life moves so fast. And I think as therapists, we're part of that, right? We're doing school drop-offs. We're helping kids with homework. We are going to doctor's appointments, trying to like return Amazon orders, right. Doing all the things. And going to the grocery store, right? And it can just, life moves really fast. And I think it takes a lot of intention to really notice our own window of tolerances, our own nervous system, and to get ongoing supervision. So for those of you listening, I am still in therapy. And, I don't say still in therapy as a bad thing. Like I love going to therapy and I love it. I love having someone point out, hey, like, have you thought about this? Yeah. And it's cool. My therapist and I have even talked about like being colleagues in the community and how that impacts our therapeutic relationship. And I also do ongoing supervision. I don't have to anymore. Once you get your license, you don't necessarily have to do ongoing supervision, but I really value someone else's input on my cases. And it's a way to like check myself, if you will, like lovingly, right? Like, 100%. Hey, am I on the right path with this person? And so those two things are just really pivotal for me. And I cherish both of those things that I do consistently. And I think they hopefully help me continue like learning and growing. And we don't want to get complacent with our growth, right? Even if we're in the fear. I think you've been in the field almost double the amount that I have.
So long. It makes me feel so old. 20 years. 20 years.
I know. It's amazing. What a gift to so many people you have been. I just celebrated my 10 years in the field March in August. And so it's just such a thing to celebrate. And also we have to keep ourselves well and healthy so that we can show up well for our clients. Yeah.
One of my colleagues, she says, we can't get crispy. I'm not getting burnt out. Or she's having a day and needs to step out. She's like, I'm just feeling a little crispy. I need to go for a walk.
Yeah.
And I love that because it's so easy for that to happen. A little bit about my story and having to drastically shift my focus in my career about 4 years ago when we experienced a trauma with one of my children. And It's wild because sometimes we're not even aware in ourselves what is coming up. At the time, I was mostly doing equine therapy. And what I started to notice in session is that the horse was attuning to me and not my client. And I was like, okay, this is some really important information. And so I had to make a shift of primarily seeing clients individually to moving more into the management, pouring into clinicians role. So I think it looks different. If I look over the last 20 years, there are so many ebbs and flows of ways that I've needed to diversify my caseload or step away and do something a little different because we want to last. We want to be in this for the long haul and help as many people as we can.
Yeah. Yeah. And we certainly, God forbid, do not want to become jaded or burnt out, or we don't want to just treat all clients the same, right? And I think that can come from a place of burnout or jadedness, right? And we don't want to become cynical. This world is harsh and there's pain and suffering. We hold so much. And so I do think just paying attention to our own selves is so, so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Amber.
You're so welcome. This has been great.
Yeah, it's been so fun just to chat with you. And it's so just delightful for me to connect with people in the community. And so I really am grateful for you and for your time. I would love to close with an affirmation and homework. But before we do that, how can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so I am currently the executive director of Astor Springs Residential and Outpatient. So we support the whole continuum of care from intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization, and residential. So if you go to our website, astorsprings.com, you can find us there. Our admissions number is also on the website. So if you are a client needing additional support, happy to meet with you and give you a tour, connect you to care. That's one of my favorite things to do with someone in recovery. It's to meet with clients who are considering it and to walk them through that journey. So website, I don't really have Instagram anymore, not really on socials anymore, but Astor Springs is the best way to find me. I would love to connect with colleagues or potential clients.
Thank you so much. Well, would you like to close with either our homework or an affirmation?
Sure. I will share one of my favorite quotes that I try to ascribe to, and that is pay attention to what brings you joy and do more of that.
I love that. I love that. I feel like that's a 2-for-1. I'm like thinking of like shampoo and conditioner that are like 2-for-1, right?
I love that.
It's like that is both like the homework and the affirmation.
Yeah, it's like what's bringing you joy and are you doing those things? Yeah.
Yeah. What's bringing you joy? And there's so much that you could expand on, right? Like what environments do you feel joy in? So that is both an affirmation and homework. So I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Well, thanks you all for listening to this episode of the Becoming Anchored podcast. We will see you next time. Thanks, Amber.
Thanks. Bye.